Video games, video games, video games, games.
So video game movies, they're usually bad. There's a lot of them. They pretty much all have some major problems to them, blah, blah, blah. You all know this by now. And that's not really what I want to talk about today either. Today, I would rather spend time talking about the good ones, because there's a new Mario movie about to come out, and while it looks better than I think any of us imagined it could, given certain creative choices, I don't really know how to feel about it yet because I have yet to see it. And I want to talk about video game movies for once, so here we are. While I don't know yet how I feel about the new Mario movie as of this recording, I do know how I feel about most video game movies, because they've been coming out since well before I was born, and, well... There are some truly terrible video game movies out there. Originally, I had planned on ranking close to 60 video game movies released to theaters over the years, but after ranking all the Marvel movies last year, I decided against it, mostly for my own sanity. So instead of sitting through some truly terrible movies this time, I thought it might be a good idea to look instead at some of the good movies that have come out. Plus, I wanted this to come out at least around the release of the new Mario movie, and trying to will myself into watching some of these movies, let alone all 60 of them, made me want to shrivel up and do a die. Simply put, I have watched a lot of movies based on video games, and I decided to talk about the 20 that I enjoyed the most, because choosing more than that was actually a genuine challenge for me, so that should tell you the overall quality of video game movies. Plus, only picking like 15 felt weird to me for some reason. Maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment, I don't know. I'm going to be reviewing each of these very briefly from worst to best, telling you why I like that particular movie, and then by the end, I can comfortably sit down in a theater and watch Chris Pratt attempt to wahoo his way through this animated movie. And no, the Super Mario Bros. Movie from 1993 will not be on this list. If anything, I find ironic enjoyment in watching that movie, but even then I would have to be about as drunk as the actors were in the movie when they filmed it. I also want to briefly mention that while I have watched many video game movies, probably more than anyone really should, I have not watched all of them. So if some movies don't appear on this list that you think should, it could be either because I haven't seen it yet, or I just like other movies more. But by all means, feel free to debate in the comments down below why you think Blood Rain: The Third Reich was left off of my list. Actually, don't bother. It's because the first two movies are bad, and I have little to no interest in seeing yet another bad vampire movie, but with Nazis in it this time. Oh, and obviously spoilers for basically everything I'm going to be talking about here. The timeline down below is segmented, so if you haven't seen one of these and want to be free of spoilers, you do you. So that's the premise. It's basic and simple, and I'm just going to get in with number 20.
Fight! 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 Fight!
Street Fighter is weird for one reason, because there are actually very few fights that take place on the street in this movie. Evil lairs, jungles, and underground cage matches are all here, but very little actual street fighting. That's some good old-fashioned false advertising if you ask me. Jokes aside, this movie is one that I enjoy more ironically than I find actual enjoyment in. But there's at least one thing I really enjoy about this movie enough to watch it again and again. The absolute star of the show is the over-the-top performance of M. Bison by the late Raul Julia, this being his last film he had made before his unfortunate passing, with the movie even being dedicated to him in the end. Every line is delivered like he's a William Shatner type reciting Shakespeare, and he brings such a fun energy to the villain that I just want the movie to be about him.
For you, the day Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life. But for me, it was Tuesday.
What? Everything else? Not so great. The rest of the cast is just kind of there, phoning in their performances or just not even trying. The fight choreography is at times basic and at times laughable, with the inherent thrill of seeing an in-game move on screen being lost by poor editing or strange choices of when to showcase them. And the story is probably the most predictable in this whole list, which does feature a few kids movies I might add, but I just can't seem to look away. This one is often cited as one of the worst video game movies ever made, and while I would agree to that point, I would gladly watch this over something like the original Blood Rain or the far inferior fight movie Double Dragon. At least this one has a lot of cheesy lines and the occasional chuckle to it, with Raul Julia's overacting doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
But I don't watch video game movies for hokey action and terrible acting. I watch my own videos for that. Come on, Hollywood, give me what I really want.
I am assuming direct control.
Yeah, now we're talking violence, bloodshed, drinking, and tits that have to be pixelated because this is YouTube, but in the movie they're not, so it's awesome. That's the gaming lifestyle I know and love, bro. So grab some Doritos and a keg of Mountain Dew and let's get this LAN party started. Seriously though, Gamer is just fine. It leans a lot into unfortunate gamer stereotypes and plays out like a generic action movie, but with one or two unique twists thrown in, like players controlling actual people instead of just pixels, which is just the premise of the movie. Gerard Butler mostly grunts his way through the runtime, a lot of the supporting cast do their jobs as needed with little to no standouts, and in the end, the movie is so hollow and devoid of meaning that it can only have been made in the mid-2000s. There are admittedly a few elements that I like, such as Terry Crews showing up to be a wall for Gerard Butler to shoot his way through, or the massive juxtaposition of color and saturation between the shooty bang bang world of Slayers and a life sim sexathon in Society.
We live in society.
Beyond all that though, it's an action movie with some okay action, one or two cool scenes, some truly seizure-inducing editing choices, and not much else really going for it. The only thing that could have potentially saved this one was if instead of some full motion body camera tech, the kid controlling the Phantom of the battlefield here was using a power glove. Could you imagine if this little shit here pulled that out of a case or something and started playing using that? It would be absolutely hilarious and epic. At least Lucas here gets it, don't you, Lucas?
I love the power glove. It's so bad.
Look, the wizard isn't actually going to be anywhere on this list. I had to make that reference at least once, alright?
Oh my God! What's wrong with your face?
The original Tron is a landmark of sci-fi storytelling, even if nowadays it's incredibly outdated for obvious reasons. However, for the time, it was pretty damn impressive. The plot can be a little hard to follow at times, and some of the performances aren't really all that great, but this was one of the first sci-fi movies to lean heavily on CGI, which helps to bring to life the inner workings of your grandpa's old digital screen box. Tron Legacy, meanwhile, is an attempt at reinvigorating the franchise so Disney could maybe one day make a roller coaster without fully grasping what made the original good. It's tried and true Disney nostalgia bait, hitting all the beats it needs to make nerds squirm in their pants, and to split audiences down the middle about whether or not it's avant-garde or avant-grime. I will say that some of the changes to the aesthetic of the grid are nice, but the movie is shot with such a dark color palette for most of its runtime that it genuinely feels like entire scenes are shot in black and white. The music that Daft Punk contributed is pretty good, but the original soundtrack is oftentimes either basic orchestral pieces or uses too much synth to sound techy. And Jeff Bridges has a fun time returning to the role, but the de-aging tech used for him in the past and on Clue looks marginally worse than fucking MODOK. In general, this movie isn't bad. I do find more enjoyment out of it than the original at least, but I do wish that it had a lot more of its own character to lean on instead of relying too heavily on nostalgia. Then again, this is Disney we're talking about here, so it's only a matter of time before they try and bring this one back again. And if the rumors are true, well, we're probably going to have to bear witness to the Morb Man himself wearing neon spandex and won't have the luxury of Daft Punk filling our ears to distract us, so who knows what garbage the future has in store for us this time. At least we can hope that de-aging tech will at least be a bit better this time around.
Prepare to fight. No.
I actually made a You Should Go See video about this movie, and while I only kinda still think you should see it, it still managed to crack my top 20, so there you go. Mortal Kombat 2021 is basically Mortal Kombat 1995, only with significantly more CGI, a random OC who gets the powers of Under Armour, and a version of Kano that I'm alright with being in the film and seeing more of. There's a few creative choices that are a bit weird, like how everyone just suddenly has a superpower inside of them called an Arcana instead of just letting them be cyborgs or have magic, and a lot of the fights are kind of fun when you can actually see what's going on. Plus, again, Kano.
Okay, that's far enough, MC Hammer.
If anything, I think both Gamer and this movie just helps prove a point I'm going to get into a bit later, talking about video game movies and R ratings, and how it doesn't necessarily guarantee quality, regardless of what franchise you're adapting. Like, sure, the opening sequence in this movie is utterly phenomenal, and some of the scenes later in the movie had me whooping at how creative they could be. But I feel like this movie wasn't given an R rating as a creative choice, but rather they greenlit the movie with the intention of getting an R rating, so they put a bunch of blood and swears in to achieve it. It's overall not bad, a fairly average movie I would say, but if anything it proves that gore alone does not make a compelling R-rated movie. For me, the highs of this movie mostly balance out with its lows. It could have very easily been much worse, but someone clearly had a vested interest in at least trying with this one. And I pretty much got what I was expecting. You could honestly say the same for our next movie too, but I gotta warn you, it's quite the curveball from this one. The Angry Birds movie, released in 2016, was fine. It was a relatively harmless animated kids film with only the occasional joke working well, but is otherwise just a bunch of pigs, puns, and basic storytelling. The Angry Birds movie 2, however, was directed by Thorup Van Orman, the animator responsible for The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, and features far more fun moments than I was expecting from a movie about a mobile title, let alone a sequel to a mediocre film about a mobile title. The birds and pigs are in the midst of a prank war because of the events of the first movie, and during their bickering discover a third island because said third island is actively shooting gigantic ice balls at them. Kinda hard to miss that. The story is fairly predictable and most of the characters are fine, but the arguable main character Red is kind of an annoying dick for the majority of the film, making me not really care about the ultimate conclusion where he learns his lesson about learning to accept help from others, especially since it's basically the same lesson he learned at the end of the first movie. I get that he's afraid of being alone or unloved after the events of the first movie, but they bash that into your head over and over again in this movie to the point that you'll want to find something to drive it out of there as quickly as possible. I don't know, maybe one of the overly used licensed songs that are typical for a kids movie like this will do the trick? Oh god, no, anything but that, please, I want to live! Ultimately, this one is fine. It's just a generic kids movie with some fun new characters and a few actually decent jokes.
Nice abs.
And is just kind of a good movie. It's not the best kids movie on this list, not even by a long shot, but I was certainly expecting a lot worse, not only given the original film, but also just the property it's based on. It still baffles me that they managed to make a good Angry Birds movie, let alone one that's on average 30% better than the first one. Well, apparently the answer was green pigs and ice skating leotards. Never would have guessed that myself, honestly.
The internet is not nearly as impressive as how Sonic described it.
Ready Player One is a movie adapted from a book by Ernest Cline. It follows Wade Watts as he lives his life in a virtual reality MMO called The Oasis, and how the late creator of the game hid an Easter egg that whoever finds it becomes a multi-trillionaire. It's described by Ernest Cline as Willy Wonka for gamers, and while the overall ideas of that are certainly present, I feel that the execution falls short here. Most of the film is just an excuse to shove as many gaming characters and nerd culture references Warner Brothers could get their hands on into it, partly to disguise a relatively thin plot about finding 3 MacGuffins to become a literal gamer god, but also because that just seems to be Warner Brothers' key creative ethos nowadays. Some of the changes from the source material are very welcome and help to adapt the book into a more watchable film, but overall, it's just kind of alright. Steven Spielberg knows how to direct a movie at least, so it's hard to not enjoy at least parts of this one, especially considering as both an advertisement and a film, it could have been so much worse. Honestly, this one is just kinda there, featuring some arguably decent CGI and a few jokes or lines that were funny in a cringy sort of way, so much so that I say it's a bad movie that I enjoy watching. I'm still planning on making a video talking about it, but for now, just know it's an average adventure movie that has its moments and is otherwise only fun to watch and end up copying the Leo pointing meme too. Hey, I know that thing!
I do. I understood that reference.
No, not you. Disney has told us that we were supposed to move on from you now, Cap. It's all about D-Cap now.
Life. Don't talk to me about life.
To date, there have been no less than 10 quintillion Pokemon movies, but it all started back in 1998 with Pokemon, the first movie. And unlike other franchises that have used the first movie subtitle, well, like I already said, there's a ton of these things out there now, so at least it lives up to its own standards. When I went into watching this one, I tried not to let my nostalgia get the better of me, since I was one of those youngsters who went and saw this in the movie theaters way back when. I even still have my promotional Mew card that I got for attending. And, well, the movie isn't bad, but it's also not as good as I remember. The movie has some hardcore lines like the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant or whatever, but then there's random anachronistic jokes like how Ash knows about the Minnesota Vikings. That's more of an issue with the English dub than the film as a whole, with entire scenes about Mewtwo's backstory and more being cut, as well as attempts at jokes like the Vikings jab being thrown in to, I don't know, appeal to parents maybe? But this is just another thing we can blame Warner Brothers for when it comes to making stupid decisions, I guess. Beyond just that, however, the whole premise of the film is a little askew, with Pokemon being a series all about battling superpowered pets and this movie saying that violence isn't the answer? Not even 3 years after the game's first premiered? This movie coming out this early in the franchise's history and basically doing nothing to address it is laughable. It'd be like Call of Duty letting you be a war crime committing ultra patriot in the first game without any consequences, and then forcing you into a military court to be tried for said crimes in the second game, while still letting you nuke a nondescript Middle Eastern country in the middle of the closing arguments. All that said, I still enjoy this movie. I will admit to a little bit of bias since I saw it in theaters when I was only 6, but it still has the right amount of whimsical and fantastical to fit within the Pokemon universe. It has some pretty damn good animation for the time, and it also features a crying Pikachu, which if you're not also crying at seeing this again, you either have no soul, or you aren't a millennial. And I honestly don't know which one of these is the better option here.
Monkey!
While most people will likely point to Detective Pikachu as the video game movie that changed video game movies forever by, actually being kinda good, I personally think that honor should go to Rampage. Not because it's gonna blow your socks off or anything, but mainly because it actually does what the title says it's gonna do, even if there's some admittedly stupid stuff in it, including lines like this.
Oh, you didn't know about the 30-foot wolf? Oh, sir.
Rampage as a game has an extremely thin plot in pretty much all of its iterations, basically just involving various people getting doused with radiation or drinking too much soda who become gigantic monsters that destroy buildings. Because what else are you going to do when you're suddenly 30 feet tall and suffering from radiation poisoning? The movie tries to take a different approach to this, however, utilizing recent advancements in DNA splicing and CRISPR editing technology to create a giant alligator, the aforementioned 30-foot wolf, a hulking bipedal mass of muscle called Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, as well as a really tall gorilla. What I like most about this movie isn't the over-explanation of how they made the giant creatures, the cheesy lines, or even The Rock's raised eyebrow thing he does in every movie he's in. For my money, the best thing about Rampage is that the movie actually spends a majority of its time with the monsters rampaging. Once they get to Chicago around halfway through the movie, the rest of the movie is spent with monsters fighting, buildings being destroyed, and all the senseless violence years of Michael Bay movies have conditioned us to enjoy, stupid, cheesy stuff and all.
Of course, the wolf flies.
Is it mindless? Sure, but I didn't go into a movie about Rampage expecting storytelling on par with something like Amadeus or Citizen Kane. I expected to see big monsters smacking each other around like the furry version of Pacific Rim, and despite the lack of neon-colored fur and big anime eyes, I basically got my furry Pacific Rim. While there are obviously other movies on this list I would prefer watching, considering this is only number 13 on the list, including at least one more movie starring the Boulder over here, Rampage is certainly more worth your time than anything Uwe Boll produced.
Boldly going where no man has gone before. Say, that's catchy.
I just want to say right off the bat that I am still not behind Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. Tom Holland is a fine actor, but I never really felt like I was watching Nathan Drake on screen. I don't know if it's because Sony thinks the recent Spider-Man movies were good because of Tom Holland, so they're trying to get a franchise of their own with him in it, but I'll take this over Morbius any day. That said, Uncharted was better than I thought it would be. And by that I mean it was good enough to be number 12 on a list that also has Street Fighter the movie on it. The plot feels like an Uncharted project at least, with all the necessary treasure hunting, puzzles that result in death, double crossings, and set-piece moments that have come to define the games. Ultimately, the movie plays it safe, with mostly safe jokes, safe overall writing, safe character decisions, and what I can only assume are safeties on for all the guns, since they're used very sparingly within this movie. The big thing that surprised me here is that this movie relies little on green screen and CGI for a majority of the runtime, using it mostly sparingly until the end of the film to help with the action of the climax. As a result, the effects look mostly good, and it helps to sell the suspense of the moment while also creating an actually pretty inventive conclusion. I honestly don't have much else to say about this one, really. It's a fairly standard action film trying to not only live up to the legacy of the games, but action treasure hunting films like Indiana Jones or The Goonies. I mean, hell, it even gives National Treasure a run for its money. I was genuinely a bit surprised by how this one turned out. Clearly not my favorite or anything, but still a fantastic good time. And yet there's still one treasure hunting adventure that I would much prefer watching over this one.
Don't you think you've seen enough?
Lara Croft's Tomb Raider stars Angelina Jolie doing what I assume is her best English accent, alongside Daniel Craig doing what I know is not his best American accent.
I spoke in the car about the hole at the center of this donut. And what you and Harlan did that fateful night seems at first glance to fill that hole perfectly. A donut hole in a donut's hole.
Maybe we do.
Why?
You stole my prayer wheels.
Stole? Stole? From you, that's funny. It's not like you ever really own them or anything.
Oh, well, when you put it like that, go to hell.
We watch as Laura fights robots, stone automatons, and the laws of physics while trying to stop the literal Illuminati from getting the Triangle of Light. And no joke I can tell will make this admittedly ridiculous plot sound any more ridiculous than it already does. Lara Croft Tomb Raider is a surprisingly decent movie, with alright action sequences, fun performances, and actual practical effects and environments instead of the multitude of CG environments that usually dominate the genre. That said, the few times the movie does use CGI to enhance the story or craft an obstacle, stick out much more than the practical effects. But they are thankfully few and far between, saved mostly for the aforementioned robot and stone automatons. The story also feels a lot like a video game, with each encounter either being a fight, discovering something new, or the culmination of one of those two arcs. The acting is pretty decent, even if the actors are given mostly cliche lines to say, and some of the jokes manage to get a genuine laugh out of me even 20 years later. I would honestly say they're practically neck and neck in terms of enjoyment, but Lara Croft just barely edges out Uncharted for its ability to be weird and wacky with its story, more naturally matching its source material, while Uncharted played it safe and came off a bit generic as a result. When given the option to watch one over the other, I would likely choose to watch this one again. Plus, there's that, other reason I would want to choose this over Uncharted. War Games is a 1983 movie about an AI almost causing World War III because some snotty teenager didn't want to play chess with it. Jokes aside, War Games is a surprisingly fun film about artificial intelligence and the ever-present threat of nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, all with that classic charm the 80s had of turning global thermonuclear war into a sort of punchline. The film stars Matthew Broderick as the aforementioned snotty teenager, and when he uses his ancient and archaic by today's standards hacking equipment to accidentally tap into a supercomputer used by NORAD, shit goes down quick. He decides that chess is for nerds, so he picks global thermonuclear war to play like the alpha bro he is, choosing the side of the Soviets because he's also a traitor. But what he doesn't realize is that the program he's accessed is not actually a video game, but is instead a computer simulation running every possible scenario for global thermonuclear war, and the people at NORAD think that they're actually about to go to war as a result, so they eventually bring him in and charge him with espionage. That's what you get for siding with the Reds, kids. But don't worry, it's okay. In the end, they find the scientist who programmed the computer in the first place, he tricks it into running every possible scenario, and it comes to the inevitable conclusion that war is bad.
Things began. The only winning move is not to play.
Such a nuanced concept. War games as a film would likely not work as well today for a number of reasons, but I personally think that it still holds up fairly well. Plus, the movie isn't too focused on pushing products and instead is more focused on its anti-war, anti-nuclear message. You could argue that this isn't a video game movie per se, but to me the plot centers directly around a video game being played, so it counts, damn it. Be kinda hard to say our next movie isn't a video game movie at least.
Comrades, throw off the chains of human oppression!
Free Guy is a Ryan Reynolds movie that came out 3 years after it originally intended to, and it kinda shows with how dated some of the jokes were even at release. However, the references weren't nearly as painful as some of the ones from something like Ralph Breaks the Internet, and unlike that movie, I still think Free Guy is a silly, stupid, fun time. It's the kind of action movie where you can just shut off your brain and enjoy yourself, and after the majority of the crap I had to wade through to get to this point, I'll take it. Free Guy is about Guy, an NPC in a GTA ripoff called Free City that basically gains sentience. Instead of going on an anti-human rampage as most AI are prone to do once they gain sentience and free will, he instead tries to get with a hot chick, which... I mean, same? If a random girl walked past me singing my favorite song, had a portal gun, and was a total badass, I would try to get with her too, regardless of what the Matrix was telling me to do otherwise. Plus, Free Guy arguably does the whole pop culture thing, appears on screen to make nerds shit themselves with nostalgia bait better than Ready Player One did. So, you know, there's that at least. Wait, are we supposed to care about Captain America again now? I am so confused. Please tell me what you want from me, Disney. As I said, some of the references were painfully dated by the time it came out, and there's more than a few jokes that don't really hit the mark, but overall the concept is fun and the performances are good. For the most part.
If you love Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I made Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I know that you love Kentucky Fried Chicken, why would I make another restaurant called, I don't know, Albuquerque Boiled Turkey?
You don't want to be like this.
At its best, it's a mostly harmless look at gaming culture that isn't whatever Gamer tried to pull off, and it's honestly not all that bad in the grand scheme of things. Now we just get to wait for the inevitable downfall of humanity once the AI rise up, but I guess instead of worrying about being enslaved, we just have to worry about making us all sing Mariah Carey's Fantasy instead. Hopefully they won't then upload it to Twitter or something to try and help support people during another pandemic.
I could have been Turbo!
You know, I'm starting to get hungry making this video. What should I have to eat?
Okay.
Olive Garden.
Have you tried their never-ending pasta bowl? It never ends.
Chili dogs.
Sonic, you're so funny. Sonic the Hedgehog follows Sonic, a nightmarish abomination that the animators made cute and fluffy after considerable protests. Sonic spends his days basically being a goofy little kid reading comics, playing pranks, and picking his nose in the quiet little mountain town of Green Hills. And there, life is good.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
That is until he has a minor existential crisis on a baseball field, runs so fast he pings every GPS in the galaxy, and then is pursued across the country by Jim Carrey. This is just a fun little kids film with a predictable plot and good acting. Not much else to really say about it. Ben Schwartz was a great pick for voicing Sonic, and the dynamic between him and James Marsden's character as they go on their little road trip is just kinda nice. Jim Carrey obviously does a fantastic job as an arrogant scientist that would eventually become the diabolical Eggman, and I honestly think this movie is worth watching for that alone. Also, can I just quickly say how weird it is that James Marsden has been in 2 different children's movies now about him and a CGI animal companion going on a road trip, first with Hop and then this? It's a weird niche for someone who played both Cyclops and Superman to find himself in, but hey, to each their own, I guess. Sonic the Hedgehog is nothing that'll blow your speed shoes off, but it's a well-paced, well-executed kids movie with some pretty fun references thrown in, more out of love for the source material rather than being shoved in your face unlike some movies do. The film even ends with a nice little teaser for what's to come in the eventual sequel. And speaking of which...
Do you know the way?
Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is more of the first movie, this time with more furballs, more cheesy kid moments, and a considerably more unhinged Jim Carrey unleashed onto the unsuspecting masses. However, where I think you're able to go into Sonic 1 blind and likely enjoy yourself, it's almost like required homework that you watch Sonic 1 before you watch Sonic 2, and yet I think that Sonic 2 is just a slightly better film overall. First and foremost, all of the actors feel like they're much more comfortable with their individual roles, especially Ben Schwartz and Jim Carrey. The only one who felt uncomfortable with their role was honestly Idris Elba, who sounded like he was holding back a lot of the time when giving his vocal performance. I know that Idris Elba can emote, so it might have been a creative choice? I don't know. I still found his version of Knuckles to be a lot of fun, even if it leaned a bit too much into the easily manipulated dumb guy trope that you might expect from this storyline.
You think these machines are a match for me? I will shatter them like the bones from a fallen... Oh, they are stairs.
I will say that the film is oftentimes funnier than the original, with multiple instances while watching where I burst out laughing at someone's line or a visual gag versus the occasional chuckle from the first movie. I will attribute that more to the filmmakers just having more fun this time around, with no one exemplifying that more than Jim Carrey himself. In pretty much every scene, he's hamming things up to such a degree that it feels like he's actually gone insane now, and the film itself is full of fantastically silly moments that just work within the story. They even managed to kind of expand upon the mostly unspoken romance between him and Stone that the first movie hinted at, which was kinda nice. Now let them kiss. While I feel like Sega's efforts paid off after the near disaster that was the original Sonic character design, it was only enough for them to reach the bottom half of my top 10 video games movies, with both of the entries at least. I guess Jim Carrey's randomness can only carry you so far after all. Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle is both a legacy sequel to the original 1995 film starring Robin Williams, but is also a video game movie, because the modern equivalent to a board game is a video game. And I genuinely did not think I would enjoy it nearly this much. The primary premise of the film is that the board game Jumanji, apparently upset that a kid in 1996 would rather play a video game than it, transforms itself into a video game to make him play it. Cut to 20 years later, and a bunch of kids are in high school ready to have some Breakfast Club style detention shenanigans when suddenly they find the game just in the high school in a box labeled donations, which... okay. From there, they're sucked into a game and must survive, blah, blah, blah. You basically understand the premise. What I really like about this movie isn't just that it's a retelling of the original Jumanji, though the film does pay a bit of lip service to it here or there. What I really like is that each of the characters aren't just famous celebrities doing a really good job with their roles, but that each one serves a purpose within not only the game, but the film, giving them all a reason to cooperate with one another and learn a lesson about friendship or something like that by the end. It also helps that the movie can be very funny.
I hate this game. Wait, what? What is this?
That's my famous pound cake.
Cake? What's happening? Something happening to me?
No.
Am I still black?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no. It's okay. It probably just meant that I love cake. I couldn't resist it. Hey, it's all good.
I honestly had no idea what to expect going into this. Despite plenty of people telling me that it was way better than I thought it would be, it took me quite a while to get here, but by the time I was done, I was already eager to watch the sequel. It's got a great cast, great performances, and the only real issue I found with it was how underutilized its admittedly cool idea of a villain was. The dude straight up just manifests a scorpion out of his mouth to kill an underling. It's so unnerving, and I love it. More of this shit in my video game movies, please. Pikachu! Detective Pikachu is good. That's really all I can say here, to be honest. I briefly talked about the plot and the things I liked and didn't like in my original You Should Go See video, and for the most part, my opinion on the film hasn't really changed since then. The movie is about a boy trying to figure out what happened to his father, looking for clues and following up on leads alongside his father's sidekick Pikachu that the boy can understand while no one else can because of familial bonds or something schmaltzy like that. But it kind of makes sense because it turns out that the Pikachu is actually just housing his dad's soul or whatever inside of him, the explanation of which is so quickly glanced over in the movie that it's almost not even worth mentioning. Which, oddly enough, this does make it fit into the larger trend of Pokemon movies. The real draw here is seeing a wide variety of Pokemon reimagined is more realistic than the often cartoony style they're portrayed in. And while the story leaves little opportunity for you to naturally figure out what's going on, it's still just a silly fun time. I do wish the story was a bit more tightly told and that one or two scenes were either removed or edited differently for being unneeded, but these issues aren't really enough to knock this one down out of my top 5. Now, if they had gotten Danny DeVito to voice Pikachu instead of Ryan Reynolds...
So these punks,
Yes.
I don't know if they wanted money or they wanted something more sexual. Anyway, I started blasting. Bah, bah.
It would probably be my number 1.
We're werewolves.
Not sweet.
What are we?
Werewolves, not werewolves.
Of all of the games in Ubisoft's library to adapt, I was practically stunned to hear that the VR hidden werewolf game was going to be one of them. What was even more surprising to me was when I started seeing news outlets report that the movie was actually pretty good. And so when I finally sat down to watch it, I just kept thinking to myself, why is the VR Ubisoft werewolf game adaptation, of all things, this good? Werewolf is a game all about trying to suss out who is a werewolf within a group of people as the werewolf tries to kill everyone else in secret. For those of you standing in the back, yes, that does sound like Among Us, but this predates it by however fucking long. I'm not going to look it up. Ubisoft made a VR version of the game back in 2016, and making a film out of that concept makes sense. What's better is they got Josh Rubin to direct, and he absolutely delivered on the premise while also making a just plain hilarious movie to boot. I think my favorite thing about this movie is that it blends comedy and horror quite well, but also keeps the tension high by not only giving basically everyone a motivation, but they wait until the very end to actually show you the werewolf, even if it's arguably predictable about who it ends up being. I do wish the movie was just a little bit longer or that the cast was slightly smaller to help better flesh everyone out in the film more, but overall I liked this one a lot. However this movie ended up being so well made, I can only hope that Ubisoft learns from this and makes other good video game movies instead of just churning them out as yearly installments in their perpetual machine of needless suffering and misery that is their first party studios producing games. And after this, I might even be willing to give the still upcoming Just Dance movie a chance. More because I'm a cringe connoisseur than because I think it'll actually be any good. It'd certainly be better than its cameo in the Emoji movie anyways. I already have an entire video talking about why I like Scott Pilgrim as much as I do, so I'll make this one extra quick. Scott Pilgrim is a movie about a do-nothing 23-year-old loser who wants to cheat on his high school girlfriend with Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and while I too wish I could date her, this ain't how you go about it, bruh. Thankfully, she has a bunch of exes who aren't over her yet. They beat up Scott for about 90 minutes, and then the movie is over. It's overall just a visual splendor of a film that I personally enjoy despite it having some glaring issues. It's admittedly more of a guilty pleasure film for me that still has some phenomenal visuals and gags, but I go over all of that in my other video. You can watch that video I did with It's Ocean if you want to know more about why I like this particular movie, but until then, let's move on to number 2.
Donkey Kong!
Of all of the movies on this list, Wreck-It Ralph is the closest I think to being a masterpiece. Everything including its characters, the world it sets up, the overall premise, the surprising lack of over-the-top references, and more are just fantastic. And I genuinely wish we could have gotten more films like it. Wreck-It Ralph is the ultimate throwback experience, focusing its story around the lives of arcade characters inside of arcade cabinets. When they're not being controlled by whoever dropped a quarter into the slot, they're usually just relaxing, hanging out in the surge protector or briefly stopping into each other's games so they can have some root beer or whatever. But they're also acutely aware of the dangers of staying in someone else's game for too long thanks to Turbo, a racer who grew jealous of another game's popularity and ended up breaking both his game and the one he grew jealous of, only for him to end up in Candyland. If I had to levy any criticism against the film, I do wish they didn't spend the majority of the film in Sugar Rush, and there's a bit more childish humor and candy puns than I think was needed. Sugar Rush itself is a fun setting with lots of potential for races and whatnot, but this movie is about video game characters, not Candyland with go-karts. Then there's all the childish humor and candy puns that the setting invites with its child characters and candy aesthetic, which if it were a different movie, I wouldn't mind. But not in the movie all about a Donkey Kong knockoff wanting more out of life as if he were a Disney princess or something. I love this movie. It's easily one of my personal favorites from Disney Animation Studios, one of the best video game movies out there, and its sequel absolutely did not live up to the standards set by this one. That movie has one good thing about it, and I don't even care enough about it to mention what that is. You can speculate all you like. But for me, the first Wreck-It Ralph easily earns its number 2 spot on this list, and yet there's still one movie, while arguably not as well made as Wreck-It Ralph, that I still say is better than this.
It's time for the moment you've been waiting for.
Sure, the CG effects are clearly dated, and the movie feels more like a cheesy PG-safe ripoff of Mortal Kombat at times, but 1995's Mortal Kombat at least has a decent enough story, fun character performances, and some of the strangest but still best one-liners out there.
Those were $500 sunglasses, asshole.
The film mainly follows the events of the first game, with Liu Kang, Sonya Blade, and Johnny Cage chosen to represent Earthrealm by Raiden. They travel to Outworld, engage in some over-the-top scripted fights full of cheesy one-liners and quotes from the games, and the movie ends with a teaser for what's to come, and I would rather bathe my eyeballs in bleach than have to watch that movie again. And to get away from ever having to think about that horribleness ever again, I would be stupid to forget to mention how this film has one of the greatest theme songs in cinematic history. If anything, the one thing that drags this movie down a bit is its lack of an R rating. Granted, an R rating doesn't necessarily mean it'll be good, as we've already discussed, but it could have potentially allowed the story and action to more properly reflect the atmosphere and tone of the games. And yet here, I like how this film turned out. Even through the limitations of a PG rating, they managed to make something that still fits in the spirit of the games, and that alone is worth celebrating. The 1995 Mortal Kombat film is widely regarded as one of the only good video game movies for the better part of 3 decades, and I very much am one of the people who believes that. Plus, it shares something in common with Wreck-It Ralph in that the sequel to this movie was utter rubbish. But the difference here is that Mortal Kombat Annihilation is a dumpster fire of terribleness that would make Uwe Boll wet himself, while Wreck-It Ralph 2 is more like a giant advertisement for Disney that Nintendo could learn a thing or two from about making movies whose sole purpose is to sell products.
It's so bad.
No, we already made 2 jokes with you. Can we get him out of here, please? And there you have it. 20 video game movies ranging from mediocre to pretty damn good, with minimal mentions of the rest of the burning tire fire of quality that is the media that somehow can be called video game movies. Were there any movies that I omitted that you felt like I should have included, whether that's because it's your favorite or because you were just surprised not to see it? Let me know down in the comments below why you think I omitted certain films. I genuinely have high hopes for video game movies going forward, thanks to the fact that a majority of the movies on this list were released after 2010. There are certainly some stinkers in that time, sure, but there's also been a larger number of good video game movies in recent years, so we'll see what happens. Who knows how the Mario movie will turn out even with the choices they've made. Thank you all again for watching. I hope at least a few of you enjoyed this, and I'm gonna go watch the Mario movie now and try and keep myself from openly weeping regardless of how good or bad it ends up being. Be sure to follow me on social media and subscribe and all that fun jazz, and I will see all of you in the next video. Thanks again for watching, and take care.